If you are joining us for the first time, we are wrapping up a series today called Screens, Scrolling, and Spirituality. This guy's really, come on. Lefty, loosey, righty, tighty. There we go. Got it. We're finishing up a 5-week series called Screens, Scrolling, and Spirituality. We're figuring out how do we be disciples in the digital age. Our screens, our phones, they are really dominating us and in many ways aren't serving us in our journey of faith. So we're wrapping that up today. But for the next 7 weeks after this, we're getting back into the Gospel of Luke. We are investigating Jesus. It's an easy invite to any friend every week. Hey, come to our church this week. We're investigating Jesus. We're planning this church, just a reminder, to reach people who don't yet know Jesus, people who are trying to investigate Jesus, people who at this point aren't investigating Jesus, but with your invite and your relationship and your conversation may start to. And so for the next 7 weeks, we're back investigating Jesus. 7 weeks, 7 preachers. It's going to be great. We've got Ziba from Langa, Common Ground. We've got Eric from Weinberg, Common Ground. We've got a dude from Wales. We've got someone from Madagascar, although who it might be may pivot. And next week, Stephen Rain from Rondebosch is going to be preaching here as well. So it's going to be really cool, and I'm sure I'm missing 1 or 2 people as well. But it's going to be really cool next couple of weeks with guest preachers just opening up Luke's gospel. And so I want to encourage you, get here and invite people, invite friends. And I want to show you the digital fast guide. So a lot of you have been hearing about the digital fast over the last couple of weeks. It's kind of our big action item off the back of this series. Don't worry, your boss will still be able to get hold of you. You're not going to lose your job because you weren't on your phone. But these are available. They're scattered around the back, and would love you to grab one after the meeting. If you're a couple, please just take one. And please don't take for all your friends who aren't in the room. We've printed these specifically for our crew, and there's still more people who aren't in the room today who are part of us who will be here next week. If you want to tell someone to do a digital fast, there's the PDF online, and you can get it to them. We're just trying to make sure that we give our people paper so that you don't go on your phones to try and do a digital fast. That would kind of defeat the purpose. And so this guide is there. It's super helpful. It's just going to give you a lot of options of ways that you can dial down your digital usage over the period of Lent. And so we're going to start it not this coming Thursday, but the following Thursday. It's the first day of Lent, and we'll take the digital fast 44 days all the way to Easter. And you get to all customize what that fast looks like for you, and lots of instructions and helpful things in here. So grab one after the meeting. You'll hear about it for the last time next week. The guides will still be available. But just wanted to make you aware of that. Okay, let's jump into today. We've chatted a lot about the actual technology over the last couple of weeks, like how these devices work, how social media works, how algorithms work, how the process of scrolling sort of short-form content is really rewiring our brain. So we've gone into a lot of that, how we are receiving information. 2 weeks back, we spent a lot of time processing how we engage with news and truth in particular on social media, and how that is distorting our views. Algorithms are not helping us. It's feeding polarization in so many ways. Today, what we're going to chat about is streaming and content. And really what I'm trying to open the can up here today is, well, what about fiction? Because a lot of what we consume on our devices is not necessarily news or trying to be news. It's actually fictional content, stories, movies, series, music. And so much of that content in the modern age really is coming to us on streaming services in whatever way that is. Netflix, Disney, Apple, Spotify. And which also, just to remind us, also uses algorithms and can send you down very customized echo chambers, which is why it's really hard to find a movie or a series these days that everybody's watching and that everybody's seen. Guys, when we were in university, like, it was so easy. Everyone was watching Lost or Prison Break or Heroes, like everyone was pirating it, everyone was watching it, right? Not so easy these days because so much more content is being produced. Algorithms are putting everyone into their little subcultures and echo chambers, which is rad, but the kind of what guys call the pop culture monoculture really doesn't exist. Everyone's not watching the same stuff anymore. And so it was really hard to find an example for later on. And so about a third of you have seen what we'll use for the case study later, and 2/3 of you have not, and I'll have to do a job explaining it. But here's the goal for today. I really want to encourage us to just be more thoughtful about what we're watching, what we're listening to, both for our own sort of spiritual formation, but also because I think it's a missional opportunity where so not everyone may be watching the same movies these days, but you have friends, they're probably your friends because they watch the same type of things you do. And so you could strike up conversations with them around their worldviews, about your worldview, based on the shared interest that you have. The book that I want to do a plug for is called Plugged In by Daniel Strange. This is the last book recommendation. Today's sermon is basically a bad version of this book. So I point you towards the book. It's really good, really helpful. It's all about connecting your faith with what you watch, read, and play. And if it helps some of you, there's a foreword by Tim Keller. But it's a really helpful little book. But the reality is, regardless of what you and I would like to think of how we come to our conclusions, how we come to our moral values and our moral tastes and our frames of reference, they are more often caught and not taught. Most people in the world, at least at first, arrive at their moral tastes and convictions by not necessarily logically thinking them through. They're doing it because it's what they've been fed, it's what they've been swimming in, often simply through taking in series, movies, music. Theologian Kevin Van Hooser has this quote, I think it's super helpful. The point of narrative is not merely to assert this happened, then this happened. Narratives make another kind of claim altogether. They claim, look at the world like this. Look at the world like this. And that's why I think Paul in Romans 12 tells us, hey, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And that's what I hope we'll start to do today is continue to transform our minds, think through life with a gospel lens, a biblical lens that helps us not be conformed to the pattern of the world, but be able to discern what's helpful, what's not helpful, what's going to send us here and send us there. The last stat for the series, because we've had so many great stats. Here's the last stat. First of all, the average Gen Zer, Christian, not Christian, spends 10.6 hours a day on digital media. 3 hours of that is social media. The average Christian Gen Zer consumes about 3,000 hours of digital content a year, and out of that, only 159 hours are Christian in worldview. So 1 in 20 of your time is spent with worldviews coming at you that are remotely Christian in nature. 19 out of 20 of what you consume is not. And what I'm not trying to say here is that we necessarily need to flip those figures. So I'm not saying watch some sort of cheesy, vomit in your popcorn Christian content just to kind of, get it up there. That's not what I'm saying. I think upping the ratio probably would certainly help. But the reality is good art is produced by non-Christians because of God's common grace, and a lot of it can really stir your souls and connect you to God in many ways. But my point is, I just want us to be far more critical and aware of what we are engaging so that we can identify things, so that we can call out the lies, that we cannot be swayed by emotions and characters that are trying to get you to see the world in a very different way to how Christ would want you to see the world. And as I say, I'd love us to be able to use pop culture in many ways to share the gospel and challenge people's worldviews and challenge their beliefs. So here's our text for today. I'm going to read it. It's from the beginning of the first letter to the Corinthians by the Apostle Paul. 1 Corinthians 1:18-25. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. This is going to be God's word to us today. And here's the plan. This is what we're going to do. We're going to firstly talk about cultural narratives and cultural idols. Then we're going to talk about how the gospel confronts and connects with these cultural narratives. And then we're going to end with a case study, and it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be the Lego movie from 2014. That's how we're going to land it, which according to the poll that I put out, 16 of you have seen and 31 of you have not seen. And I don't know about the rest of you, but we'll see. If you're here today and you're not a Christ follower, here's just one thing I want to say to you before we jump into this. I would love you today to evaluate your current worldview or reevaluate your current worldview in light of the story of Jesus. I'm maybe not going to be able to speak to your specific niche worldview, of which there's many, and people in Cape Town hold to lots of different things, but I would love you to just evaluate your worldview and think about how much you've just received your worldview from your culture around you, as opposed to really wrestling and grappling and arriving at your case. You may have done that, which is fantastic, but I would love to just challenge you to get you to think, wow, what have I been taking in since I was 4 years old that may have set me up on a path to believe something rather than something else? And then I would love you to consider the story of Jesus and how we really believe the story of Christ is good news for every single being who's ever lived. And that's how we're going to connect the dots today. So let's jump in. Cultural narratives and idols. Let me talk about cultural narratives first. Every single culture, and even subculture really, has a narrative, a story that they tell about the world that helps them make sense of life. It expresses, the meaning of the world and human existence. And these narratives, these sort of overarching stories, are then what steer the creation of culture and cultural products in various settings. Different cultures will, because of their cultural narratives, their cultural stories, will arrive at different societal laws, different codes of conduct, different systems, items of clothing, music, film, literature. You think of Japanese cinema versus Hollywood cinema. Even if you've not watched it, you kind of know they're very different, not just in terms of style, but in terms of the worldview behind them, which produces very different types of things. Cultural narratives often highlight particular things in a culture that culture values, right? That other cultures do not. It's what differentiates cultures, right? The stories of one culture highlight their hopes, their dreams, their visions of what the world is. For other people, those things are very, very different. And it's these differences that enable cultures to determine who are the heroes in our stories, who are the villains in our stories. Because one culture's hero is another culture's villain, depending on the story behind them. Some cultures place high value on honor. Japanese cinema will go that direction. Other cultures place a massive view on freedom. Your Hollywood movies will go in that direction, right? You and I receive these things, as we've said, most powerfully through smaller stories that we consume in movies, series, novels, you name it, the latest album. And as we've said, stories are unbelievably powerful things. In our passage today, the Apostle Paul, it's right at the beginning of his letter to the church in the ancient Greek city of Corinth, a very particular culture, very different from Jerusalem, where, a lot of the Bible stories have taken place and happened. And what you can see here is how Paul is comparing and contrasting the Greeks with the Jews in a very high-level way. He's speaking about and he's calling out their cultural narratives, right? Verse 22 is like the nice little summary of it. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks seek wisdom. Jews demand signs, Greeks seek wisdom. These are some of their highest values. The Jews, in this day, they loved demonstrations of power. That's what they were about. Whereas the Greeks valued the mind. The Greeks valued the mind. So the Jewish historical heroes, when Paul is writing, it's these guys like Moses, Elijah. These are powerful leaders. They came, they set people free. They parted the Red Seas. They called fire down from heaven. For the Greeks, it's Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, it's these philosophers. These are their real cultural heroes. The Jews believed in a personal, powerful creator God. They're waiting for a powerful Messiah to come, to be sent by God to remove evil from this world altogether. That's what they're longing for. The Greeks believed in what they called the Logos, the sort of rational reason, wisdom as a kind of force behind the world. Now, because all cultures are created by humans, and humans are created in the image of God, all cultures often bear something of the true story of God, traits of the creator God in their stories, in their cultural values, whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, kind of like technology, because human beings are sinful, we've all fallen short of the glory of God, all cultures are also broken in different ways. And the cultural narratives, the stories that we tell to make sense of the world, and the values that we hold up, they can often turn from just narratives and values into cultural idols. Let me explain what I mean by cultural idols. The Bible tells us that all people worship something. Every human being in their heart is actually a worshiper. And you either worship the God of the Bible or you worship a substitute God, which the scriptures call an idol. And an idol can be any created thing. It can even be an idea that ends up getting placed in the ultimate place of value. It gets put on the highest throne in a person's heart and a person's mind. It could be another created spiritual being. It could be a person. It could be an object. It could be an idea. It could be a football team. But more often than not, idols are actually good things that have just become ultimate things. They haven't been kept in their appropriate place. And we do this as individual people, which we spoke about last year. A lot of us would have been here. But we also do this as cultures on large. We effectively replace God with something else. And en masse, we devote our time and our talents and our treasures in pursuit of this thing. We make sacrifices to lay hold as a culture of what gives us meaning, what gives us significance, what gives us identity, right? And the thing that happens is, in short, cultural idols, once this has happened, they often become the very thing that makes you blind to the true God. The very thing that you worship is the thing that blinds you from seeing and worshiping the God of the Bible. So the very gift of wisdom and intelligence, when you put it in the place of like ultimate superiority, it can cut you off from the knowledge of God. It can blind you from the knowledge of God. And that's kind of what's happening here. Verse 18, Paul says, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing. For Jews demand signs, Greeks seek wisdom. We preach Christ crucified, and it's actually a stumbling block to Jews, and it's folly to Gentiles." But the very thing that these people hold up is what's going to trip them up over the stumbling block. So Paul's basically saying to the Greeks, hey, here's your problem. The idea of some Galilean peasant dying in a Roman colony to save humanity sounds like the most foolish thing in the world. And if you do kind of say it to yourself like that, you can understand how a Greek person would be like, really? The lofty wisdom of the world, and you're saying that's all going to click into place because of some random peasant in some outskirts colony who died. Really? To the Jews, right, the Messiah who dies on a cross doesn't sound very powerful. Your Messiah is dead. I'm not seeing the power. You just think about, for example, in our day and age, the American dream. The American dream, right? A culture centered on wealth, the pursuit of happiness, can very easily fool itself into thinking it doesn't need God because it's got all its needs met. It doesn't need a provider. It doesn't need a sustainer. It's got money to do that. I think one of the biggest sort of cultural narratives in our day and age, in our kind of context, is the nature of personal autonomy, the story of personal freedom to fight back against any sort of external forms of authority. And when that's placed in the position of God, any other God that then tells us how to live our lives, what we can do, what we can't do, has to be rejected in favor of this God, the God of freedom, the idol of freedom. And that's what we're going to come back to in our case study just now, in the Lego movie. It's going to be fantastic. The bottom line, I think, for our purposes, is that idolatrous cultural roots, no matter what culture they're coming from, they get expressed as cultural fruits in what we read, what we watch, the things we consume, And to just speak like a missionary, like Paul was, and I want us to be, these things, these series, these books, these albums, I want you to think of them. I want you to think like a missionary, and I want you to think of them as cultural texts, right? They are the cultural texts that give you insight into who your culture is, or who this particular culture is, what they love, what they worship. It's a helpful way to really be able to think through connecting your faith with what you read and watch. But for many of us, we're not stepping into foreign cultures. These things are part of our culture. They're part of what we live inside, and we need to be aware because they will just reinforce for us the cultural narratives and the idolatrous cultural values. And so we want to be aware of them. We want to be able to identify them so that we're not taken captive by them, and we can help free others from them. So that's just cultural narratives, cultural idols. Does that make sense? Are we kind of on the same page? It's a bit more lofty than the last few weeks where it was like 16 tips to do this. But here we go. Second point, confronting and connecting, okay? The Bible has its own cultural narrative, its own meta-narrative of the world, the story of the world through the lens of Jesus. We've sung about it today in our songs. Sean spoke about it as he led the meeting, as he called us to worship, as he prayed. We'll sing about it again just now. Here's a little summary of it. Especially if you're here and you're exploring Christianity, you might not know too much. There's a good God, created a good world that's gone bad because of sin, this spiritual evil that lives inside of us. But Jesus, the Son of God, came to this earth as a man to die on a cross on behalf of sinful humanity, to have sin punished upon him, to make a way for human beings to now be free from the power and the penalty of that sin. And he's promised to return a second time, one day, not to provide salvation for sin, that he's already done and he's offered. It's then to bring judgment upon sin and usher in a brand new world, free of Satan, free of sin, free of death. That is our story in a very simple way, in a very high-level way. That is the Christian cultural narrative. And our story, the gospel we call it, it often simultaneously connects with and confronts the cultural narratives of the world. It actually does both a lot of the time. Here's your money's worth for today. Theologians call this subversive fulfillment. The gospel is the subversive fulfillment of all the cultural narratives in the world. Here's what I mean by that. The gospel comes and it completely subverts all the cultural narratives. It turns them on their heads, it confronts them, it unpicks them, it calls them to actually look at the world in a different way. Because actually, embedded deep in your story is something that's going to cause you harm if it's not the true story of the world according to Jesus. So it subverts things, it confronts things. But at the same time, it often also fulfills our cultural narratives. It connects with our cultural narratives. It connects with other worldviews by showing us that the things that we really want are actually just pointing us to what we really need. There's longings in our heart which are good longings that have often just been skewed and latched onto other things. And the gospel's saying, no, there's something there, but this is what you're really looking for. This is what you're really looking for. And so good missionaries like the Apostle Paul, they don't just come and preach a generic gospel like the little summary that I kind of gave you now. No, they contextualize it to the particular cultures that they are ministering to the different people that they are trying to reach. And they're trying to show them, hey, this is how the story of Jesus completely upends your worldview, but also actually is the thing you're looking for all along. It does both. And you'll see Paul do this all over the show in the Bible. But here, in our little passage, he's mostly hitting the Greeks, right? That's who he's after here, these Greeks in Corinth. That's who he's trying to get to. But he does briefly touch on the Jews, right? He says, Christ is the power of God, verse 24, right? The weakness of God is stronger than men. He's trying to say, hey, to the Jews, this desire that you have for power, for signs, for demonstrations of these things, it is not wrong. It's just a bit misplaced because you think powerful men is what you need. That's your view, right? You think you need a military conqueror as a Messiah to come in to take out the Romans, someone like Moses who's going to deliver you from the oppressors. But the truth is, the power of men is never going to be enough. Because once you overthrow one oppressor, another sinful oppressor will just come and take its place. And it'll happen again and again. And it's already happened to the Jews, if you've read the Old Testament. They were enslaved to Egypt, they got free, they got enslaved to Babylon, they came back from exile, and now they're enslaved to Rome. And what Paul's often saying here is, no, Jews, you need the power of God in Christ to come and free people from slavery to sin, the thing that's underneath everything. And if that can be dealt with, one day there'll be no more oppressive empires at all. You won't just move from one into another. You'll be totally free. The power of God then came and was displayed in the weakness of Jesus by dying on a cross. Because actually, that's the only way to have dealt with the ultimate enemies and the ultimate oppressors. The gospel is the subversive fulfillment of what I suppose we would call the Old Testament. The Old Testament. But he focuses mostly on Greeks, right, in this passage. So let me just read it again and then just restate it in my own words because it can sound really complicated. Let me just read it again. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where's the one who is wise? Where's the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through their wisdom, it pleased God through the foolishness of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are called, who the Spirit is reaching, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Here's the summary. Dear Greeks, dear intellectuals, I could even say, of our modern world, your desire for wisdom is not completely wrong. It's not a bad thing, right? It's just that human wisdom, human intellect, human reason is always going to be insufficient to connect you with divine wisdom. By nature of the fact that you're a creature and he is the infinite creator, right? And so, in fact, your wisdom, when it becomes intellectual pride, is the thing that keeps you from trusting in God, from trusting in Jesus, which is why God would then do the wisest thing imaginable and actually make the foolish thing of simple faith in the death of a Galilean peasant be the way to connect ultimately to the wisdom of God. It completely destroys intellectual pride, and generations of people who worship pride are upended because the most simple person in the world can respond to Jesus by faith. It's a wildly wise but crazy thing. So you see Paul doing this all over the book of Acts. He goes to the Jews in one place, and he starts to reason with them from the Jewish scriptures about how to do things. And he goes to the Greeks in another place, and he speaks to them in a very different way. And the best place to see how Paul basically puts his theory here in Corinthians into practice is in Acts chapter 17. I'm not going to read it. We've read it before as a church, but you can go there and see how he does it. But here is just the high-level way he does it, and then we're going to look at this strategy and apply it to the Lego movie, and it's going to be amazing, as I've said twice already. So, Paul goes to another Greek city in Acts 17. He goes to Athens this time, right, the place of all the great philosophers, and he goes there, and he enters the city. That's what he does. He enters. He visits the philosophers. He speaks to them. He reads their texts. He reads their poets. He notes all their shrines that are dedicated to all sorts of different gods. He notes there's one that's dedicated to the unknown God, because they just want to cover all their bases, because they're just like, there's all sorts of stuff going on here. He enters their context, and then he explores their views. He goes and converses more with these philosophers. He finds connections in the words of their poets. He finds a connection that in their heart, they desire to be worshipers. That's why they've got all these shrines to all these gods. And he points to all these building blocks that will allow Jesus and his death and resurrection to make sense for them, to actually be something that they can follow. And then he says, cool, let me now tell you about this unknown God that you worship. And then he exposes to them, that's a step 3, the fact that God is actually, this unknown God is closer than they believe. They've got all their ways of how to appease this God and all the distant gods. And he says, no, this God, the one you don't know, is not distant at all. He's available. He's so close. And he makes sure that they know the truth about this God that they don't know. And that's so true for all of us. Many people have assumptions about God, and it's their blocker from believing in God, but those assumptions are not true. They believe in a God that we also don't believe in, if that makes sense. And then Paul evangelizes, step 4. He explains Jesus' resurrection to them, and he calls them to respond and repent. And I think this little framework is helpful. I've stolen it from Daniel Strange's book. Enter, explore, expose, evangelize. And this is what I want to encourage us to do. I mean, as a project, if you wanted, take one book, one series, one whatever in your life, and do this process, and see what you find, see what emerges. What is the cultural values? What are the idols that this book is actually calling you to worship? What is the story that this movie is telling you to believe? What's the lens it's telling you to look through to see the world in a certain way? Enter in, step into the world. Ask, what does it say? Like, what is the story actually about? What's the tone? What's the mood? What's the big idea, right? Who wrote it? Where is this person coming from? What are they trying to achieve? What's their background? What's the reason for making this series, for writing this song? Who reads it? Who's the audience? How are they going to be affected? What would the world look like if this cultural text had its way? If Taylor Swift's albums had their way in the world, what type of world would be produced at the end? And then explore. Make some connections. What are the elements of grace that you can see? How does this line up to the gospel, right? How does this line up to the Christian worldview? What traits of God can I actually see scattered in here? But also, what are the idols? What are the good things that may have become God things? What is true? What is helpful? What is beautiful? But how may it have been distorted? Is this thing amplifying God's messages to us? Is it suppressing them? And then expose them, right? Confront them. I suggest, take a little pen and paper and write it out. Do a thought experiment, right? What is the fraud actually here? What is the harm that this is actually perpetuating in our culture, maybe even in our own hearts and minds? And if you wanted to do it for yourself, but also engage in a conversation with someone who would maybe adopt this worldview, say, how is this working out for you? How do you see this playing out in your life? Genuinely ask that. How is this playing out in your life? Why is this view of the world so compelling to you? And then we explain why the gospel is more compelling and fulfilling, and we can evangelize. We present Jesus as the ultimate subversive fulfillment of our context. So, let's do our case study to end. Here's our case study to end. The Lego movie, all right? At least 16 of you in the room have seen it, so I got a lot of work to do here. But the reason I picked it is because the Lego movie is one of the best examples of post-Christian culture, of a post-Christian narrative that's trying to tell you something about a world. Post-Christian culture, in just very high level, people would distinguish it from cultures around the world that have been pre-Christian, in that, in its essence, it is essentially trying to actually fight back against the Christian story. So there's something that's very deliberate against the Christian God, the Christian faith, the Christian scriptures, the Christian worldview. And the Lego movie, for all its apparent innocence as a movie about Lego, I would want to put to you, is not that at all. So let's enter. Let's enter the story. Enter the Lego movie. It is all about Emmett. I think he's going to be on the next slide here. There we go. Emmett. He's voiced by Chris Pratt. And Emmett is this ordinary piece of Lego. You can see he doesn't even look that bright there. There he is. There's Emmett. He is this ordinary piece of Lego. He's the most replaceable guy. He's the most vanilla Lego block in the world. But there's a prophecy. There's a prophecy, right? Which Morgan Freeman, who is this wizard dude, gives him. But then Morgan Freeman reveals later on that he just made the prophecy up. It's this kind of movie. And the prophecy is that Emmett is actually the special. Emmett is the special, and he's going to be able to save the world and overthrow the evil mastermind, Lord Business. He's coming on the next phrase here. Here's Lord Business. Lord Business is the evil mastermind who's got this world in a restrictive, boring way of life. That's the bottom line. And so what Emmett does is Emmett joins up with Lego Batman and a bunch of guys, and he joins up with this crew called the Master Builders, right? The Master Builders. And they're basically this rebel crew who's trying to, they'll be on the next slide, there they are, awesome bunch of guys. And their plan is to overthrow Lord Business, who just wants to rule the world with all its ways, right? Lord Business wants everyone to follow the Lego manuals, right? To build the bricks according to the manuals. And the Master Builders want to upend that. They want to mix up all the pieces, they want to express themselves, and they want to be free. And so the whole quest in the movie, it kind of looks like a classic hero's story, right? Where you've got the seemingly ordinary guy. He finds out he's the chosen one. He awakens to his hidden greatness and the powers that he has, and he defeats the villain. But that's not what happens in the movie. Emmett doesn't discover any special things about him because the prophecy was made up. Morgan Freeman lied, basically. And there's nothing exceptional in him, and he wins by actually accepting that he's completely unexceptional, that he is literally just the most vanilla, ordinary Lego piece in the world. So the turning point is not discovering his secret powers, unlocking his hidden potential, proving he's better than everybody else. No, it's actually when he accepts his ordinariness and he gives himself up, right? And there's a line that the one Lego piece says to him, which is this: you don't have to be special, you're already special because you're you. Now, that's a kind of line that we're all like, yeah, that sounds like Disney vibes to me, right? You don't have to be special. You're already special because you're you. Who is this aimed at, by the way? It's aimed at kids, some young adults. But the big idea is it's 16 of you have watched it, and I can lend you the DVD. It's meant to inspire people to be who they are, who they truly are. That's the essence. That's the aim. Let's explore this now. Let's interrogate this briefly, right? I think there's a few things that do genuinely resonate here off the bat. Number one, it resonates with a call to stop performing, which I think is great, right? Stop trying to prove yourself. Stop trying to justify your existence. I mean, heck, some of you in the room right now might just need to hear that message, which I think if you put the gospel in there correctly, it's true, and you need to hear it. Like, you don't need to live your life trying to prove yourself, trying to justify your existence. You should be like Emmett, the fake special, and just accept your ordinariness like the rest of us, right? I think what also resonates, particularly in our context, is this idea of freedom, that we were created for something more. We weren't meant to just follow the pattern of this world blindly. If you're a Christian, you can already hear some things there which you're like, oh, that could sound a little gospel-y. But here's where it goes really wrong, really fast, okay? And if you're not aware of this, and you're not mindful of this, I think what the movie then presents to you can totally set you up against the God of the Bible, can totally take some Lego blocks and build a foundation to make the God of the Bible either implausible or evil, and just set you up against him. Because the whole premise in the movie is that the freedom the master builders are fighting for is the freedom to not be who they were designed to be, to push against their design, the created intent, the creator's intent, right? The master builders do not want to live and act according to the maker's manual. Like, when you start to say it out loud, it starts to sound really obvious, the worldview that's coming across here, right? Freedom here is defined as the right to self-determination, the right to self-identification, and the rejection of authority. That's what they're after. That is what these dudes, these little Lego dudes, are after. And what you find, okay, the movie's 12 years old, and 16 of you saw it. So, spoiler alert, it's your own fault now if you haven't watched it. I'm going to spoil it for you now. What you find out at the climax of the movie is that the whole Lego world that the movie's been taking place in is actually in the imagination of a kid who's playing with Lego. And Emmett sacrifices himself and dies to save everybody. But then he wakes up in the real world as a piece of Lego who's lying there. And he's like, oh my gosh, this is all just in this kid's basement. And he's playing with all these toys. And he wakes up, and he kind of sees what's really going on behind the scenes. And Lord Business, the baddie, is actually a representation of this little kid's father. And the father, there's the father. It's played by Will Ferrell. I mean, fantastic, right? And the father, because it's in the basement, he's literally called the man upstairs. He's literally called the man upstairs. He's the father. And he's this uptight, uncaring control freak who is insecure, and he just wants things done his way with his Lego city in his basement because he's an egomaniac. That's who he is. And he freaks out at his kid when he finds his kid doing master builder stuff and not following the instructions of all the Lego pieces in the city. And he freaks out. This is father's stuff. What are you doing? I need to make things the way they were supposed to be. And in the end, the man upstairs is wrong, and he apologizes to his kid. So the story villainizes the father. The man, literally they call him the man upstairs, who desires any form of order. And what is good and virtuous and great is that what you and I need to do is find freedom and joy by rebelling against him and mixing and matching and doing what we want. That is the heart of the story of the Lego movie, right? That's the platform it lays. And it's even classic. I love to think of this. Like, the villain's name even is Lord Business. And just think about it, right? You think of movies. It goes to the next slide. All the lords in movies are the baddies, right? It's Lord Voldemort, Lord Vader, Lord Sauron, Lord Farquaad from... No! It's not Lord Shrek. It's not Lord Shrek. It's Lord Farquaad, right? We've been bred for generations. The lords are the baddies. Now, what do you think when you go to your Bible? What do you think happens in your hearts and minds when you go to your Bible and you read over 6,000 times the word Lord? And it's talking about God, our Father, the man upstairs. We are so primed to be anti-authority, to be anti anyone telling us what to do. That is one of the dominant cultural narratives that you and I live in, and it's reinforced by what we watch, what we listen to, what we read. So I want to say, please don't uncritically consume content, because it is shaping you in profound ways. It is shaping us in profound ways. And it can be small and it can be subtle. You can take a bucket of water and you can pour it on a rock, and it's not going to do anything. It's so obvious. It doesn't do anything to the rock. You take one drop of water from that bucket every day, and you drop it there once in the same spot every day for 2 or 3 years, you'll start to put a hole through that rock. It's the small, subtle, consistent things that can undermine the true story of the world. So let's expose the Lego movie now. Let's expose the Lego movie. The Lego movie says you are special, and freedom's going to come ultimately when you reject external authority. And bizarrely, it's literally, if you reject the Father's authority, the man upstairs authority, and just be you. And the problem is that is literally the oldest lie in the Bible. That is what happened in the garden with Adam and Eve. They rejected God's authority. They sought freedom outside his restrictive rules, which at that point was, don't eat from the one tree. In the whole world, don't eat from the one tree. And pain and exile has been the result. It's the oldest lie in the book. And here is the problem, I think. The problem isn't actually God's rule. In Genesis 3, the problem wasn't don't eat from the one tree. The problem isn't God's rule. It is our suspicion of his goodness. That's the crux. That's the crux. We don't believe he knows what's best. And when he puts rules in place and he puts things in the world for us to go along with, the grain of the world, we often think he's holding out on us. And we need to fight and find our own way that'll truly bring us happiness and truly bring us freedom. But actually, the Bible itself calls God's commands life, calls his law freedom. I think his authority is there to create a space for human creativity. That's the call in Genesis 1, for human beings to go and create and express themselves in God-glorifying culture under his good rule, under his good reign. We exposed the Lego movie because the truth is, without instructions, bricks collapse, structures fall, and everything becomes chaos. That's the picture of the world that the Lego movie is ultimately hitting. It's just classic. It just ends at the end where we haven't seen what happens yet when the Duplo gets released. That's basically how the movie ends. Finding freedom from God's rules ultimately just lands us in deeper bondage to things that are really bad, that really do hurt us. And the freedom that we chase often ends up being this chain that disguises itself and wraps itself around us. Because if every human being is sinful in their heart, right, and every part of us is distorted, the Bible tells us, then what happens is a distorted will leads to a distorted desire. And that distorted desire will lead to a distorted habit. And unless that habit is fought against and stopped, eventually that distorted habit becomes a way of life and it becomes a necessity. And the freedom that we were after, we're now bound and we're stuck in something that we need consistently. We start with freedom to go after whatever we want, and we end up losing that freedom. James K.A. Smith calls it the freedom of the addict. The power of choice gets us into a bondage that we cannot get out. And the more we try, the more exhausted we become. For many people, it's the opposite of how they thought their story would end. Free sex, it's going to be amazing. Free drugs, rock and roll, alcohol, it's going to be amazing. And we get caught and we get bound up and we can't get out. And so we evangelize. Here's the good news. We get to that point and we realize, actually, we need another besides ourselves to get out. And getting the help of another requires submitting to someone else's will, to someone else's authority. And so like Emmett, the call for all of us really is to acknowledge that we don't have what it takes, that we're stuck in ways and habits and all sorts of things because of sin. We don't have the magical power inside ourselves to break ourselves free. And actually our freedoms to choose, they only end up getting us trapped into things we can't get out of. What we need at the end of all of this is God's grace. God's grace to come through, to crash into our lives, to give us something we do not have. We're all prodigal sons who've chosen our own ways and gotten stuck and caught up in a pigsty, and we need help. And we need the help of the prodigal's father, someone who can give us what we need, someone who's actually a giver from the beginning, who can give us a new will and help us be free from our old wills, which have got us stuck. And so the gospel says, no, the man upstairs, he is a father, but he's a good father. He's not a control freak. He really does know what is best for you and for me. And after we went and we got ourselves into trouble, this good father didn't stay upstairs. He came down to earth in the person of Jesus Christ, his son. And like Emmett, he sacrificed himself for you and for me. And he defeated the things that we are truly captive to. Satan, sin, death. The things that make us think the ways of God are the things that are held captive. We're not. Those are the good things. That's where freedom is truly found. As John says in John chapter 8, which is so true, who the Son, Jesus, sets free is truly free, is free indeed. Because there's things in this world that we think will set us free, and they don't. We need Christ to come to free us from below the surface so that we can be free from all the things that truly keep us captive. That's our little expose of the Lego movie. And we're going to call it them and invite the band up. And I'm going to invite you to stand. I hope you see just by that little expose, and it's just a rough attempt to do it, that there are so many agendas out there in the world. There are so many people and spirits behind people that are trying to essentially take your mind and your heart and your will captive to things that sound good, that sound like they'll bring life, but ultimately will rob you of life, rob you of freedom, rob you of joy. And I'm going to pray because I want God to just help us to be people who are ongoingly discerning and critical about what we consume so that we can be free and God can lead us and guide us, and actually He can help us. Or we can help Him set other people free by reaching them with the gospel.